my GNU+Linux distro recommendations for a beginner user. A beginner user is someone who is just getting into the GNU+Linux scene for the first time. What distributions to use, to look for, where to start looking for distributions. The first place top recommendation is Linux Mint. Linux Mint is basically a distribution of GNU+Linux which works for the vast majority of people for basically any general purpose use that some generic person may have for the rest of computing. So it is a general purpose operating system which is easy to use. It has all the necessary things that a computer operating system should have. If you throw the Linux Mint at a crowd of random people, chances are that most of them can use it. And I do mean most of them. With Linux Mint, it is such a distro that even if it's not necessarily the best option for you specifically, you can still use it, and it will still serve you well. So, will Linux Mint be the absolute best for everyone? No. But can it be used by everyone? Basically, yes. Now, whatever other distros there might be for other use cases, well, if you have some highly specific need, then you are not really necessarily a beginner user. Also, some skill set in computing and just a general interest in computing might already make you an intermediate user, even if it's your first time getting into GNU+Linux. If you have the interest in computers and all that, and you have the interest in learning new things about operating systems and all that, then you might already be an intermediate user. But anyway, for the vast majority of the general population, Linux Mint works for everyone. You can just pick it up and it goes. It works. It's called a just works distribution for a reason. It just works. It's an operating system. It doesn't get in the way. And also, I like to call them beginner friendly instead of quote easy to use unquote. Some people make the mistake of calling distributions quote easy to use unquote. That's not what's relevant. What's important is that it's beginner friendly. See, here's the thing, anyone can use Mint. Even advanced users can use Mint, because the operating system on a computer, it exists to serve a purpose. There is a function that the operating system exists for. So, if you want an operating system that doesn't get in the way, then Linux Mint, it works, and for many of these reasons it is good. For beginner users, it is very beginner friendly. It is perhaps the best operating system that I can think of that I would recommend to anyone. If I'm unsure as to what distribution might be the best one for you, I'll just recommend Mint, because chances are that it's gonna work for the vast majority of the people. Of course, there might be a few people who for some reason don't like it, but who cares? They'll find something else. But the first place you should look for an operating system is Linux Mint. Definitely, that's the first choice, the option, the first place to look for. But of course, it's not the only operating system you have as an option. In fact, this very recommendations list that I'm right now recording will have 3 recommendations. So that is the first place recommendation, Linux Mint. Right, so let's get to the second recommendation. Now this one is for those who are the gamer types, who like to play their video games, and I'm specifically talking about the more modern games, not old school emulated games. I'm specifically talking about the new games. Now, for those people who are gamers, they like their games, their new games and all that. While they can also use Linux Mint, if they want more newer features and kernel updates and all kinds of things like that, Pop OS, it has a very bizarre spelling. I believe it was POP ! OS. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the spelling for Pop OS. Pop OS, it is also easy to use. It is pretty easy to use operating system like Linux Mint is. It is also based on Ubuntu, which I didn't mention about Linux Mint, but Linux Mint also has a Debian variation, but whatever. It is easy to use. It is very similar to Mint in that it offers the user pretty easy to use things, and it doesn't get in the way either all that much. If you're coming from Windows, you might find the user interface something to get used to, but that's not really an issue necessarily. It might be for someone, but, well, you decide that. But the key difference in why I'm recommending Pop OS in the second place, and specifically for the gamer types and all that, is because it comes with the latest kernel features. The Pop OS gets latest kernel updates and the drivers and all that, so they get updated to the latest versions, whereas on Mint they don't. There are security updates on Mint, but Pop OS has also new release updates for the kernel softwares. But the rest of the system stays the same, so they don't get any new features. So, Pop OS, it's basically like Mint. Anyway, that's Pop OS, that's the second recommendation. Now, let's get to the third recommendation. ZorinOS. ZorinOS is basically, for the most part, just Ubuntu with some appearance changes, and it doesn't install Snap by default, and it's basically just Ubuntu, more or less. It just has some changes to make it a bit better. So basically, Ubuntu, it has often for a long period of time been recommended as the best operating system for new users. But Ubuntu itself is not necessarily the best recommendation. Not anymore anyway, and not for a long time now. Instead, all of these recommendations, Mint, Pop OS and ZorinOS, are all based on Ubuntu. The Ubuntu itself is not good to use. But distributions that are based on it, they change the past features, get rid of them, and do something else on top of it that's better, so these derivatives are better. ZorinOS, it is good. Well, ZorinOS has a fancy graphical desktop environment. If you like that, then you can use it, I guess. Now, ZorinOS also comes with those Windows software Windows compatibility layer software installers. You can automatically install all the Windows compatibility layers, the Wine, and all that stuff. So you can do all of that if you want to have compatibility with the Windows software. You can also install Wine on these other distros like Mint and Pop OS, but you have to do that manually, whereas on ZorinOS there's like the option in the GUI you can enable all the Windows compatibility stuff. So if you want to run Windows programs for some reason, then ZorinOS is pretty good for that. And it has the fancy user interface. If you like the interface more than what's on Mint or Pop OS, then you can use ZorinOS. It has the desktop environment. Yeah, basically the desktop environment is the reason for the third place recommendation. Yeah, I don't really have much else to say about it. pretty much the same things apply to all of these 3 distros. They are more or less just the same, like they are based on Ubuntu, all the same basically. They just change some things here and there to make the Ubuntu better, to get rid of some of the bad options, bad things that Ubuntu does, bad choices that Ubuntu has made. So Ubuntu has made some bad choices in their system, and these derivatives, they change those bad features out and improve upon Ubuntu basically. So it doesn't really make much of a difference which one you choose out of these 3. But I do still recommend them in this order. And of course, I also want to explain what it means to recommend them in this order. It doesn't necessarily mean that one is better than the other. Everyone has their own use case and preferences, so whatever fits them the best is the best for that. Is the best for them. Because of everyone's own personal preferences and requirements. So there is no one best distribution, because what you want from your distribution is different, so different people have different needs and preferences. So different distros suit them the best. So what it means to have first and second and third place recommendations is that the first place should cover the vast majority of the people. So you start looking from there. So you start by looking at Linux Mint, and then you look at Pop! OS, and then you look at ZorinOS. That's what it means. So that's the order in which you should look at those distributions to find what you're looking for. Yeah, that's basically what it means. I will also want to mention at the end about other distributions, because a new user should hear something like this. Someone who is like first getting into GNU+Linux, there are distributions that you should not choose. Arch-based distributions should not be used by an absolute beginner. This list should be as easy. This list of distributions in this speech recording of mine, it has distributions that are basically usable by anyone. It has to be usable by a person who doesn't really know anything about computers. Now, of course, someone who is entirely unfamiliar with computers in general is going to have difficulty with them regardless of the distribution. So that's just a given. But if you're competent enough with a computer to know how to turn it on and whatever, then these distributions are for those users. So therefore, these users, the absolute beginners, they should not use distributions like Arch. And I wouldn't really recommend any other rolling releases either. And there is definitely, and you definitely should avoid all the other weird distros that don't really have anything that advertises themselves as a beginner-friendly distro. Some old-school distros like Slackware or something you should avoid, of course. But basically what I'm trying to say is just stick with the Ubuntu-based distros, basically, for a new user. There's really no reason to go anywhere else. Like, you get with the Ubuntu-based distros what you would want from a computer as a beginner user. Now, for those who are more experienced with computers, who are no longer beginners, really, even if they haven't necessarily used GNU+Linux, if they already know about computers, I already talked about this earlier, you might already be an intermediate user. But in anyway, yeah, you should basically just use the Ubuntu-based distros. It doesn't really matter which one you choose, but those descriptions I gave of the distros should help with the decision-making process for anyone looking for distributions. So, now a final conclusion summary, very shortly. Start by looking at Linux Mint. It should fit basically any purpose for any person in general, like the beginner users. That's the best. It fits it works well with everyone. While it might not be the best one for a person, it still works for them. So it definitely covers the vast majority of the people. Then Pop! OS for those gamer types who want the newest kernel versions and drivers and whatever for the absolute latest performance updates for their video game FPS has to be high. And then ZorinOS for those who like the user interface and want the easy to use Windows software compatibility installation. Yeah, that's it for this speech.